Morning, and thank you for joining us on such a miserable February dreary day. I'm Patrick Fairweather. This is Rachel Forster, who's our head gardener at Patrick's Patch, and we're coming to try and bring you a bit of joy on such a horrible morning by encouraging and helping you to get seed sowing, which after all we need to start thinking about because it's February. We're going to do a demonstration for about 20 minutes and then there's an opportunity for you to ask questions. We would ask, if you want to ask a question as we're going along, if you can type it into the chat button, which you'll find at the bottom of your screen, and we will answer those at the end of the demonstration. If we do run out of time, because we have only got a 40-minute Zoom slot, then we will aim to answer those questions through our website afterwards. The demonstration is aimed at beginners or novices. So we're trying to encourage people who have not got great experience from growing your own from seed to start and get good success. So that's the audience we're aiming at. We'd of course love to have had you here in person, but can't do that at the moment. But hopefully before too long, we'll be able to see you back in Beaulieu. So for those of you that are not local, because we've got no idea where you are in the world, we are standing in a dark and damp shed in Beaulieu High Street, and it's a little bit makeshift, so we hope you can see everything that we're doing, and for those of you that can't stay the whole course, there will be a recording put up if you want to revisit any of the ideas that we're sharing with you. So the format of the 20 minutes ahead is to talk about what we're going to sow, the systems we're going to use, the compost, the watering, and then also showing you how actually to sow seeds. And I'm going to now hand over to Rachel, who's going to talk initially about what it is that you should be thinking about sowing in February.
Yeah, good, great. Thanks, Patrick. Hello, everybody. So it's February. It's quite early, but spring's on the way. So I think it's a good idea to get organised really for the whole year, but concentrate on what needs doing now. So we produce a list in Patrick's Patch of what to sow each month, and that's a really useful reference. So if you're planning out your whole year, think about it month by month, and then you can start gathering your seeds and then separating them out. So I have my February box of seeds here, things that need sowing in February. Just be aware, just listen to what I'm going to say that needs sowing, because it is too early to sow lots of crops. You don't want them ready too early because the soil won't be ready to plant them when you've got them to a certain size. But what you can actually sow now, what likes to be sown now, is so you can think about getting early salads. Salads you can be eating in April and May. So sowing rocket, mizuna, mustards is all really good. And then think about crops that you actually eat in June, crops that harvest in June, broad beans. Kohlrabi is a really surprisingly easy crop to grow, really good. Kohlrabi, spinach, and then you might think about if you want to try some longer crops that take a long time in the ground, like parsnips. You sow those now, won't be harvesting those for a long time. Cauliflowers you can get going now, and leeks. So there is a lot that you can be getting on with. And then, oh yeah, if you have got access to a heated propagator, you can start your chilies off in February. We don't have any heat here for growing our seeds, so we tend to stick more with the seasons.
So we're going to post a list for anybody that wants on the website to have a look at everything that we propose you can sow in February. So everything that we're going to demonstrate today is being sown inside. It's not being planted in the ground.
Not directly in the ground. These are trays going into a cool polytunnel which is really the equivalent of a windowsill.
Yeah, brilliant. So Rachel's now just going to talk through some of the different modules and systems that we use for different seeds.
So if you're a total beginner, that you're probably most familiar with a seed tray. People sow their seeds into seed trays. We do a lot of that, and then we will prick out the seedlings into modular trays. So these are modular trays where you can grow your plants and make lovely little individual plants come out from each section. Very easy to plant and good to establish in the soil. So sometimes we will have sown the seeds into a seed tray, and I'll explain more which go into which system later, and then we prick them out into these. But sometimes you can sow directly seeds straight into the modular tray, and the advantage of that is you don't need to disturb the roots at all. So once the seed, you put one seed per section, and that's it until you plant it. It can just be left alone. The big advantage for us of the modular system in Patrick's Patch is how you can have your small vegetable plants growing on in the module, take out a crop from the ground in the morning, and then straight that afternoon plant another crop straight away, and you've already got it like 6 weeks old when it goes in. So it saves space in the garden growing in the modules. Just got some alternatives as well. In our garden centre, Fairweather, they're selling these peat-free coir discs like that, and they swell up. I've got some here. They swell up into those little jiffy pots, and that's the same principle as the modular tray, in that you're not going to have to disturb the roots. You then sow the seeds in, and then you can plant the whole jiffy pot. And oh yes, and then there's my new skill, making square paper pots. These I'm going to use, these a nice big size. You can make them what size you want. We're going to sow our beans in these this year, because beans really like moisture, and I'm thinking that this cardboard will stay like blotting paper moist, and then that will give the beans a bit of extra moisture when they're planted anyway. So those you have to make.
So if you go on, if you'd like to make the paper pots, Rachel's done a video which we'll be posting on YouTube. If you look up paper pots, Patrick's Patch, brilliant thing to do with children as well. So
yeah, that's good.
So that's really those at this time of year. Those are the formats of sowing systems that we use, and now Rachel's going to move on to talk about compost, which is the most important ingredient probably you can include in seed sowing.
Yes, definitely. So when you're thinking about what compost to use, you try and find in a substance that the seeds are going to like to germinate in. And for a seed to germinate, it needs air and moisture and warmth. So particularly in these colder months, a nice warm, open, airy compost is going to be perfect for seeds. So we're using the peat-free Melcourt in Patrick's Patch, which you can buy from Fairweather's in these great dumpy bags that can be refilled. And that's good, because when I've been tidying my potting shed recently, there was a horrible number of plastic compost bags generated just from 1 year. But this system is brilliant, so no more plastic bags. It's a peat-free compost made of bark chips, and that is actually making it a nice open texture. So it's really good for the seeds. I still add some of this vermiculite to the compost because it's a multi-purpose. So to adjust it for seeds, I add some of that this vermiculite product, which is like an expanded rocks, and that opens the texture up a little bit more.
What sort of percentage are you adding, Rachel?
I'm adding about 10% till you can see it sort of evenly through the mix. If it was the summertime, these peat-free compost do dry out a little bit quicker than previous compost mixes. So this is John Innes potting compost, the seed sowing compost. That's John Innes #1. And it's loam based, and the loam, it makes it a bit heavier, And in the summertime, I'll add a bit of sterilised topsoil to this, just to give it more water holding capacity, but I don't want that in the winter. So I'm just going to show you how to fill the modular trays. Again, thinking about just literally, so this has already been sieved. You've got to invest in a good sieve, a good metal one, not the plastic one, so that'll last a long time. So this has been sieved already, and then I'm just scooping it into the trays, and I just wanted to show you how you don't then, you do need to firm it down because you don't want gaps of air that the root will find a big gap. It won't like that. So you want it nice and filled evenly, but rather than poking it down with your fingers, if you just tap it from the bottom, that will really settle it down quite a long way, and then fill it and then top it up again. Then the next stage is really important. We then need to get the soil moist. So going to really say this morning, something to remember is to water the compost first before you sow the seeds. And Patrick's holding up this, again, like the sieve, extremely useful, invaluable piece of equipment. This is a watering tray. And you can put that capillary matting in the bottom of these as well for watering your plants. Really good, useful thing to have. So I fill the trays up and still they're nice and full of air, and then put them in the watering tray to soak the water up from the bottom, and that way you're not compacting that top surface. And also, if you're doing it before you sow your seeds, you're not washing the seeds down to a deeper depth in the compost. And that could take up to an hour. You'll see it comes up by the capillary action, and then you see the surface gets wet at the top. So then you go and have a coffee break whilst that's going on. So that's
brilliant.
That.
So we're now ready to move on to looking at how you actually sow the seeds.
Yeah, so we're going to do seed sowing in a module tray, in a seed tray, and in a plant pot. So I'm going to do the hardest one first. So I've chosen a lettuce variety, lettuce all the year round. We grow a huge quantity of lettuce here in Patrick's patch, which goes over to Steff's kitchen, the cafe. So I'm very used to sowing lettuce. Lettuce is really small seed, and you can sow it into modules, but it really is quite hard to get one seed per module. So we sow it in these trays first, and the thing to think about when sowing in a seed tray is not sowing too thickly, because the seedlings will compete with each other, and you'll end up with not such strong plants. So if you get your seed tray, have a think about how many seeds you'd like to see in there, and you'd be surprised how few it is really. So I happen to know that 30 seedlings is a good number for this half tray. So in my time, fiddly though it is, I have counted to see what 30 lettuce seeds look like, and it really looks like a tiny amount. But then if you ration yourself to that amount on a teaspoon, you won't be able to see that, but it's a tiny amount. And then you know that you're only putting that number on the surface, and it really won't look like very much at all. So you can either just sort of rain them on carefully, or there's the technique where you can feed them on from the crease in your palm. And sometimes I sort of march them off with a pencil from that crease and just spread them around the tray. So
the important thing, Rachel, here is about really the density that you're sowing at, isn't it?
Yes, and trying to prevent them being sown too thick.
Yeah, you don't want them competing with each other, or you're going to lose some success. Yeah.
And then with lettuce seed, so this is a good one because it's so small. This is where it's really important that you've watered your tray from the bottom, because if you did water that from the top, just wash them too deep. So we're going to talk about, you can pass me a bean seed, Patrick, about how you think about how deep the seed wants to be. If you just remember, it's got a nice big bean seed there. So that's a broad bean seed. If you think the parent plant has given that seed enough energy to travel twice twice its depth, it's twice its size to the surface of the soil. And any deeper, it will run out of energy, and then it won't reach the surface to be able to make its own food. So lettuce seed is obviously tiny, and you actually do sow those on the surface. And then I just cover them with the vermiculite, and that works fine. And actually lettuce seed is unusual in that it likes light to germinate. Most seeds don't need light, but lettuce will like to see a little bit of light to germinate. So then I just sprinkle that over the surface. You could have just sieved some seed compost over the surface, but you're literally just putting a tiny layer on. Good. So that's lettuce. And then the next time when you're dealing with bigger seeds, that of course is so much easier. So I've got here in this modular tray, I'll move back a bit. Don't know if you can see, I've put some seeds on this section of the tray. Because what I was going to say with these modular trays, if you're sowing more than one type of vegetable, you can cut the trays and then you can deal with them separately if things germinate at different speeds. But this one, I'm going to sow a whole tray of spinach. This is a good variety, Amelia. So these are nice, big enough to handle, so you can actually pop them right in the middle of the module. And then a good tip is to sow the whole tray out rather than pushing them down as you go, because otherwise you lose your place and then you push them all down as one operation. Okay. And then always a nice positive thing to do is sow some sweet peas. There's so much to look forward to. Got a nice variety here, Singing the Blues. And we sow our sweet peas, we put 5 in a 9-centimetre pot. And then when they develop into seedlings, we'll prick them out. So I've just put them in a 5 like dice pattern on the surface and then push them down. You may have read that you have to pre-soak sweet pea seeds because it's a hard seed. Pea seeds are quite hard, but I found because I've pre-soaked my compost and then I just let them soak in the compost and they always germinate fine without pre-soaking.
And Rachel,
yes.
Where would you sow a broad bean? What would you put that in?
So broad beans this year I'm going to do in my paper pots.
Right. And how many seeds in that?
1, because I know it's going to grow quite quickly into a big plant.
Yeah.
So I'll be putting 1 bean in there to plant out from the pot.
And if you didn't make paper pots, then you'd put 1 per
I'd put 1 in,
9
yeah,
centimetre.
1 per 9 centimetre, yeah. Yeah, because
okay.
beans are big.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So what about the environment that you're then going to put these seeds into?
Yes, so now I'm going to put these, forget this tray here. So what I do is, this will be going up to my greenhouse.
I'm going to bring it
oh yeah, fantastic, yeah. And then I've got a lot of these old sheets of perspex that I cover my seeds over before they've germinated. Keep the moisture in, keep the heat in. That's really good. Alternatively, this is really nice system. If you get a nice windowsill propagator, put that over whilst they're germinating, keeps it nice and humid for the seeds in there. And then as soon as they germinate, you let a bit more air in. They're really good. Then, because we have a few mice problems, sadly, though this year it seems to be quite good. But when my seeds have germinated and then I take off the covering, I then cover the trays with fleece, which helps keep off any pests and also keeps a nice stable environment for the seeds. So horticultural fleece is really useful.
So Rachel, how often would you expect to water these seeds after you've sown them?
But at this time of year, I don't expect to have to water them at all until they've germinated. And even then, I'm going to be really sparing with the water because water can take the place of air in the compost, and that's not good for the seedlings. So I might just give them a little spritz with one of these.
Yeah.
But you get used to feeling the weight because each compost is different. Get used to feeling the weight of your tray because it might look dry on the surface, that just need a spritz, not a full soak.
Yeah. And just to give everybody an idea of how long they should wait, say from sowing, how long would you expect to wait for the lettuce to appear?
This time of year, about 3 weeks to germinate. So you can be thinking, oh, it's not happening, but it is slower. In our cold greenhouse, it's quite slow.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's the basics of everything that we wanted to show you. I think, Rachel, have you what are the key things that you wanted to leave people with to think about getting real success?
I want them to think about the size of the seed and making sure it doesn't go too deep into the compost, and then really take your time over the seed sowing, because it will save time in the future. So if you try and get them all at the same depth when you're sowing, then they'll germinate more evenly, and just enjoy sowing it and having something to look forward to. It's really good.
And I think the other thing is better to sow little seed and often.
Oh yes, that definitely.
Isn't it? Because if you've got a small garden or you're growing in containers, it's much better to be having a little bit coming through on a regular basis.
Even for a home gardener, you're probably sowing your early lettuce in a little pot like that, because you don't need 30 lettuces a week like we have.
Yeah.
More like 5.
Right, I can see there are at least. Sorry, excuse the IT, but I'm having to go closer to the laptop to see some of your questions, which we will now try and answer. Right, I'm going to read the questions out so everyone can hear them, but also Rachel. What is the advantage of multi-purpose compost over number 1 when sowing small seeds, please?
No advantage. Well, but I would say that there isn't a peat-free seed compost available. So it's like the seed compost will have lower nutrients. And there will be some specialist seeds that really don't like nutrients, but with vegetables, the nutrient levels are not usually so critical. And by the time you've diluted it a bit with what you're adding,
I think the quality of the compost is important. Don't use a bag that's been sitting outside all winter that is wet. I think, as Rachel said, we're trying to be using more and more peat-free products, and that this Melcorp product is peat-free, but the John Innes range does contain peat. And in fact, we're doing a trial in the garden this year to try and show people.
I've done a trial here sowing rocket seed last week. And in fact, I can already see, Patrick, there's even germination across them all. I've got John Innes number 1, New Horizon, which I think is coir-based, peat-free. The one that we're using, the Melcorp, and then I've done my own little mix there. But they all seem to be the same at the moment.
So we're getting pretty even results with peat and peat-free products, which is encouraging.
I think the thing that you get used to is how much water your compost needs.
Yeah. Okay.
But you have to sort of get used to that through the year.
So the next question is perlite the same as vermiculite? Is that just a brand name?
No, it's different. I can't quite. They're both volcanic rock products. Perlite's like expanded, isn't it? And they both do the same. The perlite, they both do the same thing when you add them to the compost. But the perlite is round balls, so you can't top your seeds off with it because it's just rolling about. They keep the soils warmer, don't they? They hold it out.
I think the perlite is good for mixing, but if you put it on top, it's going to blow away more easily as well.
Yeah, and it's not platy. This one's a bit more platy in structure. Yeah.
Next question: can you place bubble wrap over the seed tray? I don't see why not. I mean, it lets air in as long as
with anything like that, cling film, but as long as you whip it off, because you don't want them. That's why this is better. This is better than my sheets even, because what you don't want is the seedling like bumping into moisture on these covering, because that will make it rot off.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's just the same thing, isn't it, putting that on. But the ultimate is having a nice propagator lid.
How do you sterilise topsoil, Rachel?
Oh, in a big, in the old days, in a big oven. Can't remember what, 70 degrees, or it smells nice.
Are there any more?
Well, you can buy it. You buy it sterilised.
Yeah.
I used to sow ferns, and I used to sterilise my own topsoil in an oven, but that's not practical.
Are we saying people could take topsoil into their oven in the kitchen? Can you do that?
It wouldn't be popular, would it? No. In this case, you buy a bag of sterilised topsoil, because you're not going to use a lot over the course of the seed sowing. Yeah.
Right. So I'm afraid we're telling you to go and buy one there.
In a plastic bag.
That's a question from Jill. When can you start sowing root vegetables, onions and greens in the polytunnel?
So I don't grow my onions from seed.
So if we start with root vegetables, so parsnips you can sow now into plugs. Carrots?
Carrots, no. And I've tried last year. Started too early, because you can't with a lot of the root. Well, not a lot with carrots, that you cannot grow them in modules. They really don't like being transplanted. So you've got to sow those direct in the soil. And I would say early April is fail safe.
So onions, we would recommend you plant from sets.
Mid-March.
Which you can plant either into plugs now.
If you wanted to get them going, you could plant some onion sets into perhaps slightly bigger than this tray, and get them going. But it is just as it's nearly March now. You can put them straight out in the ground.
Yeah.
Then. And then beetroot, we do grow our beet, because we use a lot of beetroot. I do both. I directly sow it into the soil from mid-April, but from mid-March I'll sow it in modular trays like these. Root crops don't like root disturbance, so I would never sow those in a seed tray and then prick them out. I'd always use the modules. Yeah.
And then, as Rachel mentioned, spinach you can do now, as you could Swiss chard, could be done in plugs.
Yeah, again, I don't know, spinach you can get going a little bit earlier than the chard. I'm going to be doing the chard at the beginning of March. But I can put this on the website, can't I?
Yeah,
I can put what we're doing each month.
And then if you're talking about brassicas.
Well, there's a range of different. I've just sown yesterday something called colettes. They're like a cross between sprouts and kale. And I also grow a kale called Red Russian. And these are quick leafy kales that you'll be eating in May, in what used to be called the hungry gap. So if you sow those now, they will be ready to eat in May. But the longer crop brassicas, I sow much later, more like the end of April. But that's to do with the succession in our soils, which is why you have to plan your crops to make sure you know where they're going.
Right, I always struggle with watering and often lose small seedlings due to overwatering, damping off. Do you recommend a spray bottle for long term in the trays?
Well, no. Although whilst it's weather like this, but as soon as you get a hot day, even in March or April, they're going to need more water than you can deliver with the spray. The damping off is in the colder months, I would imagine, that problem. And then so we've talked about making sure you're sowing nice and thinly, clean trays.
What about the time of day of watering, Rachel?
Oh yeah, well, better off in the morning rather than so it's cold through the evening.
Yeah, you don't really want to leave the leaves wet going into the evening.
No, and you want a bit of air movement. So as soon as you can get the door open on your greenhouse, get a bit of air around the seedlings.
Right, I sowed beetroot last year, but they did not develop. Any tips, please?
Right, I bet they were eaten by slugs. I don't know, you never know what could have gone wrong. When you sow a beetroot seed, it's a conglomerate seed. So one little seed, what you think is a seed, is actually like 3 or 4 seeds in a cluster. So when you sow them in your modular trays, they come up usually more than one, and then we thin them out to get one strong plant. But I do know when I sow them directly in the ground, there is a problem with slugs.
Okay, yeah. Oh, and well, the last two are not about growing, they're about, are we open? So are you open? Yeah, the garden centre is open, but we are also open for click and collect. And in fact, we do have a seed offer of, if you spend £20 or more, you get £5 off. So if you're rearing to get going, come out and see us. We've got seed potatoes, onions, shallots, every sort of seed that you could want at the moment. So yeah, good time to get going. And also, someone said, is Patrick's Patch open? Yes, Patrick's Patch is very much open. Right, what's our best remedy for slugs and snails?
It's a controversial one, but I haven't used slug pellets for over a year now. We have a good balance in the garden of wildlife, and I think because I'm growing the seeds and planting out larger plants, they're less vulnerable when I get them out into the soil, because yes, I will have problems if I'm sowing directly into the soil, but not as many as other people tell me. So whatever we're doing, we're getting right here.
Coffee grounds, or is that a...
Well, yeah, it makes you feel better if you do something, and yeah, and around things like Cosmos, I will build little corrals of coffee grounds which we get from our cafe. There's a lot of different methods people use, but what I've found over the years is that getting the balance of nature in the garden is what's worked here, and also mixing your crops up so you've not got big monocultures is going to help. But it does happen, and then you have to in fact, that's what we were going to say this morning as well, about how things do go wrong and your seedlings may not work. You just have to keep trying.
Yes, I mean, you know, we can give you all the advice that Rachel has from her experience, but, you know, don't be disheartened.
No.
We don't get it right every time. Yes. And that's, again, where if you sow little and often, yes, you spread the risk, and it means that you're more likely to get success.
And another thing that I also cheat in that I will directly sow into the soil, but then when I have gaps because of slugs, I then have some spare plants that I can pop into those rows. So yeah, things like that. Yeah.
There's a question about, is it true you have to have fresh parsnip seeds in order to germinate? And do you have to sow directly in the ground, as my allotment is flooded at the moment?
We've stopped growing parsnip here because they're in the ground for almost a year, taking up a lot of space. The parsnip and parsley, they're umbels with the big like cow parsley flowers, and those seeds don't keep, and carrot, those seeds of carrot, parsley, parsnip don't keep very well. So I would invest in fresh seed. It's also really takes a long time to germinate. So people used to mix radish in so they could see where the row was that you'd sown. You could probably hold back, you know, another 2 or 3 weeks, but yeah, you can't be sowing them in modules. They're like carrots; they won't transplant.
Yeah.
So that's a shame.
Someone's asked about, when do you plant seed potatoes? Well, it's too early to plant seed potatoes. You should be buying them now and chitting them. And we've got a video that you can find through our website. But our next session in March will be looking at how we're going to prepare and plant.
Yes.
Yeah.
If anyone wants to feedback with what they'd like to know, that would be useful as well.
Yeah. Right, just a couple more. A few thank yous. That's great. Thank you. Starting from scratch. I'm starting from scratch. Think I ought to make a raised bed. What should I fill it with?
So when you work out the volume of a raised bed, it's a big volume. So if you've got access to homemade compost, that's great to bulk out at the bottom. But you always need to put some loam in. Wouldn't have to be sterilised. Could be delivered in a dumpy bag. which you then mix with the organic matter. Because if you just use one of the organic based compost, such as like an eco compost, we found it just sinks down very quickly. So it's a mixture of organic matter and loam.
Okay, I think we're nigh on 40 minutes, and hopefully we've managed to answer some of your questions. Hopefully we've left you with a few tips, bit of enthusiasm to go away and get started for those of you that haven't started yet. And there will be a recording of this if you follow a link from our website that you can watch it again. And keep an eye on the website, because we're planning on doing a few more demonstrations in the future. But thank you for watching, and we look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thank you.